grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt. Yonder on Calvary's mount outpoured, there where the blood of the Lamb was shed. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. Dark is the stain that we cannot hide. What can avail to wash it away? Look, there is flowing a crimson tide. Whiter than snow you may be today. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. Marvelous, infinite, matchless grace, freely bestowed on all who believe, all who are longing to see His face. Will you this moment His grace receive? Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. Amen. You may be seated.
Good evening. Good to see everyone out tonight. A pretty good crowd tonight, and appreciate that. As we open up in prayer, Chris, would you open us in prayer, please? Amen. Thank you. As far as announcements are concerned, the Awana are having their kickoff party tonight. They'll be at the YMCA from 6:30 to 8:30. Next Sunday evening, the youth will get their kickoff started, start the new year with school. I think they're probably going to go really soon and pray at all the schools, I think, before school starts. I think that's one of the things they're planning. Also coming up on the 24th, a couple of weeks from now, we will be voting on 2 new deacons. If you noticed in your bulletin, the 8 current deacons that we have, 2 will rotate off. Can't vote for any of those 8, so need to replace Travis Pfizer and David Thornberry. So be praying about who God would have for us to serve as deacons. Plus, there's an insert in your bulletin about who is a deacon, the responsibilities, and who candidates are. So you might want to look over that, pray over that list, and that God would lead us to the 2 that we need to have for this upcoming year to add to our other 6. If you haven't filled out the VBC servant commitment form, please do. We need those as soon as we can, so we can, nominating committee can try to get everything finished up. It's going pretty good. Had a lot of people turn them in. If you haven't turned yours in, please turn that in. And also, Ivy's going to get started on a youth choir, and that's going to be beginning on Sunday, September the 7th. So they will be meeting at 5. So if you know some kids that like to be in that, just encourage them to come out on September the 7th. And then Kevin's going to help Ivy with that. Kevin Yates is. And then coming up on September the 6th will be the Advanced Baptist Church car show. And if you'd like to make a donation to that, just give that to Scotty, and he will take care of that. So, are there any other announcements that we need to make? If not, Bob, you can come lead us another song, please.
Take your hymnal and turn to 334, Blessed Assurance. We'll do all 3 verses. Stand and sing with us. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I in my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Amen.
I hope you paid attention to those words in that song. This week we buried Marcia's, one of her first cousins, and some of you may know Bobby Lowry. Bobby used to help with the music down at Harmon Memorial Baptist Church, and he's at Community Heights right now. And Bobby and Marcia are like third cousins or something, but Bobby sang that song at that funeral, and he sang it in a way that we sing hymns and we just sing through. But when you sing those with real meaning, and you look at the words as you sing them, and they speak to your heart. Okay, it's not just like singing words, but it's words that minister to us. And those words will really minister to you if you will look at those words and look at them from that standpoint. This is about me. This is about me. blessed assurance. You know, Jesus is mine. What more assurance do we need? And it's real. Next time you sing that song, look at it and sing it with meaning. Not that you don't, but look at it a little different way next time. All right, before we get into our lesson tonight, do we have any prayer requests? We got one from up there. Was that Benton? Okay. 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 But she's doing a little better. Yeah, that's good. All right, any others? Jesse Klein, would you pray for us, please? Amen. Thank you. Claire, yeah. Okay. Yes, remember that family if you would. All right, if you'll get your Bibles out and also get your papers out, and Let's go back for just a minute. Let's put everything in order. Let's go back to chapter 10 for just a minute. Chapter 10 lays the foundation for chapter 11. Chapters 10, 11, and 12 are all part of the last vision that Daniel has. And when we go back to chapter 10, it starts out. Let's look at the very first verse of chapter 10, and it says, "In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel." Okay? Now notice what Daniel recorded about that message or that vision that he had from God. It says, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. Okay? So let's put in perspective. First of all, we're probably, when it says the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, we're probably around 536 BC. Okay, the Medo-Persians had defeated Babylon, and so they are the ruling kingdom at that time in the world. And so Daniel, notice he says he understood it. He understood exactly what the message was. And it says in verse number 2 that in those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. Now, why was Daniel mourning 3 full weeks? Because the message that he got was about his people and about the suffering they were going to have till the time of the end. Now, a lot of what's recorded in chapter 11 you'll not find in the Bible other than Daniel. Because we know that somewhere from 400 BC till the time that Christ came is sort of what we call the silent period. Okay? There's not much recorded about that other than if you were to go look in the book of Josephus or in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, you would probably find some of this stuff. If you look in the history books, you will find the history about what's in this, okay? And so, as when we got to the end of chapter 10, and we began chapter 11, and it talked about the things that were taking place. It says, also in the first year of Darius the Mede, of chapter 11, verse number 1, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Of course, now this is Gabriel. If you were to go back and look we talked about it last time in Daniel chapter 6, when Daniel was in the lion's den, and if you remember Darius, they tricked Darius into making a proclamation which he could not change, that if anybody prayed to anybody other than Darius, that they were going to be put in the lion's den, and so anyway, Daniel prayed, and they turned him in, and Darius didn't have anything other that he could do other than put Daniel in the lion's den. But if you remember what Darius said when he went to Daniel and he put him in the lion's den, he says, I know that your God will deliver you. Not can deliver you, so will deliver you. And then when Darius went back the next morning and he asked Daniel, are you okay? And he said, yes. That God had sent his angel to watch over him while he was in there and close the lion's mouth. Well, that's what verse 1 was all about in chapter 11. That was Gabriel coming. He said he was there during that time, okay? So notice how God watches after his people, okay? And Darius understood that, okay? Now, when we think back about Michael, well, there's mainly 2 angels in the Bible that we talk about. It's Gabriel and Michael. Michael is who? Michael is the special angel to watch over Israel, okay? He has been and he always will be, okay? And so we know that Gabriel was sent and he was delayed for 3 weeks, and Michael came and helped him. And it talked about the kings of Persia and the prince of Persia, which was talking about the demon angel, Satan's angel, who was trying to keep Actually, he wanted to keep Gabriel from going and interpreting this, because God had a plan for Israel, and Daniel was writing this to encourage Israel that God was not giving up on them, and it was going to be an encouragement to them. And Satan's tried to interrupt it, intercede, try to intercept Gabriel on the way there. But Gabriel comes and he delivers that message. Okay, in verse number 2 it says, and now I will tell you the truth. Behold, there are behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all, and his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Okay, now did God have a plan for Greece as well? And the answer is yes, okay, because he was going to use Greece to the Greek New Testament, okay? And so he wanted that language. And so God had a plan for Greece as well. But we see that Xerxes, and if you were to look in the Bible, that you may see him as Ahasuerus, the king who allowed Nehemiah to go and to go back to rebuild Jerusalem. And so God is using all these to accomplish his purpose. And so then verse number 3 says, then a mighty king shall arise, talking about Alexander the Great. Now this just didn't happen overnight, okay? These are verses one right after the other. But there was years in between some of these. I mean, it just wasn't that the Alexander the Great and the Grecian army came in and just overnight took over everything. They had no communications back then. You may have a battle over here and then a battle over here, and it took years for them to finally take over everything, okay? Then we know that soon after that, Alexander the Great died. And we know that there was 4 generals that took over, okay? Verse 4 says, and when he had arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of the heaven. All right, so there was 4 of those generals, but not among his prosperity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. So the 4 generals did not have the power that Alexander the Great had. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. If we were to go back and read history, then we would find out it took 22 years for these 4 generals to divide up the country that Alexander the Great was. And even then, there was turmoil among the 4 of them, okay? They did not get along. The 4 generals did not get along. That's what chapter 11 is all about. Chapter 11 is about 2 of those generals and their descendants from them, okay? And so we're looking at, 100 and some years in chapter 11 of everything that's going on, okay? So we know that the Alexander the Great has conquered the Medes and the Persians, and now when we come to verse number 5, we see it's a different story right now, okay? And it starts out, the very first thing it says is that also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion, and his dominion shall have a great dominion. And then we go to verse 6, and it says, and at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north. All right, so wait a minute. We've got a king of the north, and we have a king of the south. Why would that be included in Daniel's vision? Why would God reveal this to Daniel? What was the vision for? what did it reveal to Daniel? Daniel was praying about his God's people. He was praying about the temple. He was praying about Jerusalem. Okay? So now here we come. We have a king in the north and the king in the south. The king of the north were the Ptolemies, okay? So they were one of the four. He was one of the four kings, okay? And so he was king of the south, okay? So when we say north and south, north of what and south of what? That's what it's about. The king of the north and the king of the south. What's in the middle? Israel. That's what's included. Because we know that Daniel is going to see how much suffering his people are going to have during those hundreds of years, 150 years or so, that they're going to have to go through. No wonder Daniel mourned. No wonder Daniel fasted and prayed and fasted for 3 weeks, because he saw what was going to take place to his people. And as we look at these, beginning of these, if you look on your paper, you can see some of these things, and they really, to us, they don't matter. I mean, because it's just history, okay? But the one thing about it is that it's history, it's prophecy that was fulfilled by history perfectly, okay? So what the vision that was given to Daniel turned out to be, as Daniel prophesied, it came out to be exactly what Daniel saw in the vision. And so, that encourages us that we know that even in this time, I mean, we're talking about, Daniel was this was 536 BC when he wrote this. And we're talking about the king in the south, and we're talking about over 200 years later. Okay? So we're looking at a lot of, things that could take place and how they're recorded exactly right. History proves that Daniel's prophecies are true. So when we look at this and we begin with the king of the north and the king of the south, is that the king of the south was Egypt and Arabia, okay? We know Egypt was south of Israel. And then the king of the north was Syria. And if you remember, when we went back and we studied, I believe it was in chapter 8, that it talked about the little horn, okay, which was Antiochus Epiphanes, okay? We're going to see him again here. And so in chapter 8, we see him, he appears a little bit before 173 BC. So now you're talking Daniel at 536 BC, and then the little horn, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, he shows up a little bit before 173 BC. So you could see the difference that's going on there. All this time that once the Medes and the Persians were defeated, and Alexander the Great came in, that we see their all this time that was in between, okay? So we're looking at now that the Medes and the Persians ruled for maybe 200 years, and before they were defeated by the Grecian army, okay? And so now we're looking at as the Grecians came in, we're looking somewhere around 336. Alexander the Great died in 323. 20 or 22 years later, the four kings finally get everything divided up. So it brings it on down. We're getting close to, 300 BC. And then when you look in here, I put some dates in there. Look at verse number 6. You can see here on your outline that it talks about the Ptolemy was, he was the one that was the general over the southern kingdom, and then Antiochus, that he came from the northern kingdom, Syria. We know that he came from that. The Seleucians, Seleucus, anyway, It's easy for me to say, right? And so we know that's where he came from, okay? So we see the dates there. So this puts everything in perspective. It's been, when Daniel saw this vision, we're looking at 250 years later, okay, that we see some of these things taking place, all right? But all during this time, Israel is being controlled by the Medes and the Persians. However, the Medes and the Persians were good to them. Darius and the other kings allowed them, Xerxes allowed them to go back to their home country during that time. God used them to do that. So now we're going to see in chapter 11, we're going to see a lot of the sufferings that took place. Because the king of the north and the king in the south did not like each other. And so they were trying to go there back and forth, attacking each other. And you can just imagine that the king of the south wanted to come up and attack the king of the north. Guess where they had to go through? Israel, okay? Israel is caught in the middle of all this, okay? And so sometimes they try to resist it, and which we find out in here that when they try to resist that, they're not strong enough to resist, and so they suffer a lot of cruel things. So we'll go in and we'll read some of these verses, and we'll go down until we come to the points that are really important. So let's go ahead and start with verse number 6. And at the end of some years, they shall join forces. So the two kings were coming trying to join forces sometimes, and that didn't always work. And if you remember, a lot of times that to make treaties between two countries, that one of the countries will offer a daughter or what to marry one of the king's sons or whatever, so that they have a union there that sort of tries to bring peace, okay? Well, we see that here too, but it doesn't always work, okay? So it says, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up, and those who brought her, and with her who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. Okay, now I mean, that's a lot of stuff. Okay, and does it really matter? It matters from the standpoint of, yes, history was fulfilled, prophecy was fulfilled, but as far as, no, it doesn't. Okay, these are just names and everything that took place. Verse 7. But from the branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, and shall come up from an army and into the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. So we see here, the king of the north, and they're fighting again. Verse number 8, and he shall also carry their gods captive, and to Egypt. With their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. And so now we're down to in verse number 9, we're down to 240 BC. Okay. Also, the king of the north shall come to the king of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Verse 10. However, his sons, Seleucus' son, shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So we see here it is, there's this battle going on all the time, and Israel's caught right in the middle. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him, and the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of the enemy. And we see that even this king is deceived by some of his own people, so that he is defeated, okay? Verse number 12, and when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail, okay? So we see all the infighting, all the killing that's taking place. Then we come to verses 13 and 14, and this is 13 years later, and Antiochus is there. And it says that he returned with a great army. Okay, so for the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south, also violent men of your people. In other words, he's talking about the people of Israel, the Jewish people, there in verse number 15. And shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fail. They will try to resist, but they fail, okay? Verse 15 says, so the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his troops, his choice troops shall have no strength to resist, but he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, okay, with destruction in his power. So what's the glorious land? Israel, okay? So we see here Israel's caught right in the middle again. The people of Israel are going to be suffering, okay? And so then we come to verse 17, and he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of the whole kingdom, with upright ones with him. Thus he shall do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be with him. After this he shall return his face to the coastlands, and shall take many, but a ruler shall approach against them in the end, and with approach removed he shall turn back to him. So if we look back, we see that that Rome is going to enter the picture here before long. Okay, it's not quite time yet, but they're going to get there. And so in verse 20, it says, there shall rise into place one who imposes taxes on a glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. In other words, somebody is going to take care of him, okay? And a lot of times it's their own people that kill their own family members, okay? It's really sad, but that's what takes place. Now, when we come to verse 21, we find Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, okay? This is the little horn that we read back in Daniel chapter 8. This will lead up to verse 35, which will bring us to the Antichrist, okay? So as we let's look at verses 21 through 35 and see all the destruction that was taking place, because we know that Antiochus Epiphanes was in control for about 12 years or so, okay? And he really brought havoc upon the nation of Israel. So let's start with 21. And in his place shall arise a vile person, okay? This is Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, to whom they shall not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Now, when Antiochus Epiphanes first comes in here, he's coming peacefully, okay? And so when the Antichrist comes, how's he going to start? Exactly the same way, okay? He'll try to bring peace, but that's not his motive, okay? And in verse number 22, it says, with the force of a flood, in other words, like an army, a huge army, okay, that Egypt's army, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant, okay? So what does that mean, the prince of the covenant? The high priest of Israel, they will kill. He will try to stand up. Ananias, the third, he was the high priest of Israel at that time, and of course he couldn't stand up against him, okay? So we see that take place, and that was around 171 BC. So we know that Antiochus Epiphanes, that's like 2 years or 4 years after he first came into power, okay? So, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people, okay? Now, some people believe he was demon-possessed, okay? And so what he does, he makes an alliance with one of the other kings, and, and it's a deceitful plot to gain a greater power in Egypt, okay? So here he is, and he comes in peaceably, but yet he's trying to gain more power. And remember, he's from the north. Egypt's in the south, okay? Verse 23, and he shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province. That's talking about Antiochus. And he shall do what is his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So what happens is Antiochus comes in. He brings in riches to the certain people in Egypt, trying to win favor with them, so that they will support him, and he will, he can take over, okay? But it won't last forever. Verse 25 says, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, okay? So that's what Antiochus Epiphanes wants to do. He's from the north, but he wants to take over Egypt. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Okay, so when you look on your outline in verse 25, it says Antiochus attacked Philometor, and the latter fell due to treachery by his supporters. Notice what it says in verse 26. Yes, those who eat portion of the delicacies shall destroy him, okay? His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So what they encourage him to do, his supporters encourage him to go ahead and attack Syria, and knowing that he will be defeated, okay? And so he was setting him up to fail. What happened? Antiochus offered to all these people inside Egypt money and promises of all this stuff so that he could gain favor with them and eventually take over. Verse 27. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. In other words, they come together and they try to make a truce. In today's times, when countries sit down to try to make a truce, to stop war, and they sit down and make those truces, most of the time, one or both are lying, okay? One will agree to stuff that knowing that he's not going to, just for a little while, that, that for whatever reason, that he can gain support or something somewhere else, or he get benefits from this. And he said that, that they're going to work things out and they're going to try to get peace, knowing that in just a very short time that he's going to break the covenant, okay? Does that happen? All the time, right? You remember the times when we grew up that if we made a handshake agreement with somebody, we kept it, okay? That was binding, okay? And now you can have all these contracts. I look at all these baseball players and football players and all these pro athletes who go out and sign these contracts. And as soon as somebody makes more money, they sign a contract, makes more money than them, they break their contract so they can get more money. There's no honor, okay? And so, anyway, we see that's what was taking place here, okay? They made their promises, but they weren't going to keep it. Okay, they were speaking. They shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper. For the end shall still be at the appointed time. All right. Verse 28. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, which is who? Israel. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. Okay, so what's going to happen? He's going to come in as he's going back north up to Syria, and he's going to be met with a revolt from the Jewish people, and so he's going to strike their temple, and on my notes it says here that it talks about 80,000 dead, 40,000 captured, and the sacrificial system profaned. I've also read, too, that it was more than 100,000 that were killed during this time. But there was a lot of people killed, right? When they tried to resist, that's what's going to take place. What's going to take place during the tribulation period? Some will try to resist and will not take the mark of the beast, and what's going to happen to them? They'll either be put in prison or they'll be killed or whatever, okay? Verse 29. And at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall be not like the former or latter, okay? So he's going to get back up there, and then he's going to come back down, and he's going to come back through Egypt again, okay? Or come down to Egypt again. In verse 30 it says, For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, and therefore he shall be grieved. And so, who were the ships from Cyprus? This is a Roman fleet. Okay, Romans starting to make their mark in the world at this time. Okay, and so it says the Roman fleet from Cyprus sided with Egypt. In other words, they didn't let Antiochus Epiphanes do any more damage to Egypt. Okay, and so he sent him back. It says thwarting Antiochus's attack, Antiochus retreated, taking out his rage on the Israelites in his path, okay? So we see there in verse 30 that when Rome turns him away, then he goes back up, and guess who's really mad? Because Rome told him to go back home. He goes back and he takes it out on the nation of Israel, okay? Again, they're caught right in the middle. They're going back and forth, okay? Verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So this is when the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, goes in and sets up his image or the image of Zeus in the temple, and then they change everything. They do away with the daily sacrifices, and we see again the abomination of desolation, which is going to take place again when? During the tribulation period, okay? So everything that we see about Antiochus Epiphanes is similar to what the Antichrist is going to do, okay? Verse 32, those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. Now, in other words, those who do wickedly against the covenant, there's going to be some in Israel who will betray their own people. Okay? Why would they betray their own people? For greed. Because Antiochus Epiphanes will offer them things and try to get... And if you remember when we studied in Revelation, that's exactly what the Antichrist did with some of these countries and some of these kings. He offered them things, trying to get them on his side to build up his kingdom and get people so he could accomplish what he wanted to, okay? He says, and he shall corrupt with flattery. So there's some in the nation of Israel who will betray their own people. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits, okay? So we know that they will try to resist this, okay? But notice what verse 33 says, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Now, that's talking about the people of Israel who understand who their God is. They believe in the Word of God. They hold fast to their faith during this time. And so they will instruct many as to what to do. But it says, yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame. You know, we talk about martyrs who were burned at the stake. And so we see that some will be killed by the sword, some by the flame, by captivity and plundering. Okay, so here we see the nation of Israel suffering again. Okay, so during this 12-year period that Antiochus is in control, the nation of Israel suffered greatly. The people of Israel, so many of them lost their lives, and they went through so much suffering. It's no wonder that Daniel was was praying for 3 weeks, and he was down and out, and he was fasting because if we remember chapter 10, it says he understood the vision. He knew what it meant. He knew what was going to take place, and he was affected by his people. Then we come down to verse 34. Now, when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. Okay? In other words, some will pretend to join Antiochus for personal gain. Okay? And we know that happens all the time. And then we come to verse 35. We see a transition that's going to take place. Okay? So we go from 162 BC to week 70 of the 70 weeks. It comes to the tribulation period. So it says, verse 35 says, and some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the end of the time, because it is still for the appointed time. What does it mean that those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white? What proves, what's the thing that will prove to people that you are a true Christian? Persecution. Persecution, okay? Those who really love Jesus Christ, that when the enemy comes in, if they try to pretend that they go along with the enemy, then guess what? Are they standing up for Jesus? No. You may have heard the story before, about years ago back, I guess it was, there were some in a foreign country somewhere, and the Christians were being persecuted greatly. But still the church in this country was still strong. They were still going. But they knew that any day that soldiers could come to the door and they may lose their life. They may be put in prison or whatever. And so they were meeting one night, and all of a sudden there came a knock on the door, and they went and answered it. And there are the guards. There's the people coming, and they know that they're going to be arrested. And so what these guards do is they say, okay. He says, if you're just here and you're not really a true Christian, you get up and leave. And about half the congregation got up and left. Half the congregation stayed there. After the half that got up and denied Christ and left, the guards go shut the door. They come sit down and says, okay, now let's have church. Okay? They got the hypocrites out of there. Okay? Persecution. Those that were still there, they weren't afraid. Okay? They were going to stand for Christ. How many times have we seen in America school shooting? There was one where Columbine, where the guy said, "Are you a Christian?" She said yes, and the guy killed her. Okay? I read every day. I don't know if some of you all read, and some of you help me. The Muslims are killing, it may be in Africa or whatever it is, they're beheading them, even right now, last week, that Christians away from here. How does Satan attack us? We really don't have, like these other countries, that maybe, they don't have the protection. The government is not for Christians. They don't give them protection. And so they suffer persecution a lot. What does Satan try to do to destroy the church here? He tempts the church to become part of the world. Do I? Yeah, it will tempt them. I mean, how many people, even today, just like some of these people here, that it says, but many shall join them by intrigue. Some will try to do it in order to gain things. If everybody in this church was here at one time and an army came to that back there and says, if you're not a true Christian, you can leave. How many would get up and leave, knowing that they may lose their life if they don't? You know, they're caught up in the world. How many would say, well, yeah, I left, I just pretended that I wasn't a Christian, okay? Is that what Christ wants from us? No. What does he want? He wants us to stand up, right? I mean, we're in God's army, right? I mean, who is our enemy? It's Satan. Do what? That's right. And so, you know, Satan has his tactics. It would be hard for them, you know, for Christians to be persecuted in America today, although some are still, but not like they are in these foreign countries where they don't have the government to protect them. And so Satan still attacks. He wants to destroy the church, right? And we see here, Satan wanted to destroy Israel. But what was God's promise to Abraham? God will honor that promise, okay? That no matter what the nation of Israel go through, it will never be annihilated. It will never be wiped out. There will always be a remnant. There has always been a remnant ever since that the nation of Israel was formed in Egypt. And there will always be some here. There will always be that remnant who will not turn their back on God, okay? I hope you are part of the church that will not turn their back on God, that will stand up. And when you think about it just for a minute, if you were to look at service on Sunday morning, how many of those are truly Christians? Now, I'm not going to judge, okay? I don't know people's hearts. But like I talked to somebody this week, says, now, I'm not judging, but I'm going to be a fruit inspector. Okay? Jesus said, if we're his child, we'll bear fruit, right? If you go to John chapter 15, it talks about bearing fruit. How many are really bearing fruit? We've probably, if you look on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, then you can see who are willing to stand up all the time. The core, okay, the core. There's always the core. There's always that will always be there, that will stand up, will support the church, and support Jesus Christ. We need to learn, we're going to go through things in this life, but we need to take a stand for Jesus. There were some here in Israel who turned their back on their God, okay, just to save their own neck or to gain financially. And we don't need to do that, okay? We need to stand on the Word of God, stand on his promises, and we need to be faithful to go witness and tell others about Jesus. Because how long will it be before Jesus comes back? Could be any time. Everything's fulfilled for Jesus to come back. There's nothing else that has to take place for Jesus to come back except for one thing. What's the one thing? Till the fullness of the Gentiles. When the fullness of the Gentiles takes place, that's when Jesus is going to come back. And the fullness of the Gentiles is what? When the last Gentile person is saved. And God determines, time's up, I'm sending Jesus for the church. When will that be? I don't know. Peter wrote what? He said, God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Amen? Until Jesus comes back, we need to tell people about Jesus. Okay? We're going to start verse 35 next time, or verse 36 next time. when we get into the Antichrist, okay? All right, anybody have any questions on this? If you want to learn more about everything that took place in there, you just go out and get in your history books, and there's some other books that written on these. Like I said, you can read Josephus, the book of Josephus, or Maccabees 1 and 2. Those books were left out of the Bible, but they were written during these times. Okay. All right. Anything else before we dismiss? James, you want to dismiss us?